Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Dublin, to Malahide, and the second part of our morning's presentation. Welcoming those online again to join with us this morning. We are now moving to a presentation by Dr. Seán Ó'Riordáin, who we had with us yesterday, and very honoured to have Seán with us again this morning. Seán's presentation for the Assembly members, you have a printout of Seán's presentation on your tables, so we'll keep Seán on the big screen and you can refer to your presentation notes as Seán moves through his presentation. We'll then immediately follow up with our Q&A session immediately after Seán's presentation. Over to you, Dr. Ó'Riordáin. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, rather than going through slavishly on a Sunday morning my presentation, I'm just going to focus in on a number of key points coming out of yesterday's session and reflections indeed on yesterday's session, and hopefully pointers that might help you in your work over the next number of months. I think it was interesting to see the response of the international representatives yesterday to the Citizens' Assembly, and it's something I can bear out in my international work as commissioning editor for the Local Government Information Unit, that there are a huge number of chief execs, mayors and senior politicians right across the globe who are intrigued, certainly from the feedback I and my colleagues on the research team have been getting, to the initiative that's been undertaken through yourselves. And I'm also around long enough in Ireland to have been at the start of the breakup of the old Dublin County Council into the three county authorities that we now have, and coming forward from that through various iterations of reform right up to and including 2014. And I can frankly say that if somebody had said to me that there would be a political willingness at national level, and this is a very important point because some of you raised this, that there would be a political willingness at national level to ask citizens of Dublin to reflect upon what would be the best form of governance for the city and city region, and what possible role might be played by a democratically elected mayor. If you had asked me that 5 years ago, I would have thought it completely impossible. So I think the fact that you're meeting and existing and engaging in great depth from yesterday's observations on the issues suggests that there is a willingness politically at national level to advance this process and to advance it successfully. And for that reason, I'm particularly hopeful, because it certainly wouldn't have happened in previous iterations of reform that I was involved in here in Ireland, and indeed in other parts of the globe. Now, in saying all of that, coming through from yesterday's feedback as an observer, I think there's a few important points to establish, if you like. And the first point that I would make is that there are many, many models, and we highlighted a number of the key models yesterday. We got extraordinary inputs from the elected representatives as mayors of Dublin City and the three surrounding counties, and we got equally impressive presentations by any standards from the international representatives. And what really struck me about yesterday was the fact that there was such a commonality of perspective coming through from all of them. And I think as a consequence, there's much to be learned and much to be gained by listening from those different perspectives. So models can either be generally urban or regional. It is quite normal to expect tension between the national and the local, and indeed between the local authorities or the regional assembly and the democratically elected mayor. It's a political system, so you would have to expect that. What is critical, however, is that we have the means by which those conflicts and arguments can be worked through. That is a key feature of every successful model of city governance across the globe. If they don't exist, where there's a dialogue between national, local, you will generally find the process becomes consumed by conflict as distinct from people working together to a common purpose. Alongside that is the idea that citizen engagement is absolutely critical. You are an absolute manifestation of that at the moment, but there's got to be a continuing role for engagement between the directly elected mayor and citizens in whatever format that mayoral role takes over the future years. Again, it's a common theme that we find coming through from the different successive systems of city mayor, executive mayor, democratically elected mayor models, again, across the globe. A further key point, and highlighted again this morning from some of your questions, is the issue about resolving financial relationships. And the point was made that local authorities in Ireland have tended not to be proactive when it came to borrowing funds for the investment locally because of the arrangements at national level. Now, that actually has changed quite dramatically in the last number of years. But the same rules effectively apply to local government in Ireland as apply to local government in Nordic states, because they're governed by the rules of economic and monetary union. So that the same types of controls on the amount of borrowing that's undertaken by local government in the Nordic countries apply to what happens in Ireland. The difference is, of course, is that because they have much wider ranges of responsibilities and functions, they have, in volume terms, a greater capacity to borrow money. But at least in more recent years, in terms of capital investment, that is now the case in Ireland. Indeed, Breed mentioned that Limerick City and County Council is in receipt of borrowing funding to support the regeneration of the Opera Centre from the European Investment Bank and the Council of Europe Bank. In all instances, there's a continuing role, a critical continuing role for the local elected representatives. Going back to the Helsinki model, where they actually have their executive councillors, but a far bigger, wider body of what are styled as leisure time councillors. And what I mean by that is people who in their spare time are elected representatives representing their own immediate community, and how important that is to the overall policy development that takes place at the local authority level. So in the same way that successful models have very strong public participation structures in place, equally important is a very strong relationship between the local elected body and the mayor, whether that's at local or indeed regional level. And finally, in terms of resourcing the mayor, again, a point that was raised yesterday by several of the members of the Assembly, most mayoral systems will have their own staff supporting them, as well as having the wider administration and professional bodies of staff that support the delivery of services. So, the idea of a mayor going in with a personal assistant or whatever tends not to work. They do need to have access to levels of expertise and levels of knowledge that might necessarily be within their own authority, and they can bring them in. And that, again, is a common theme throughout the different systems that we see globally. So where does that bring us? I was really intrigued by the extent to which people were coming forward with different models, and even this morning, can we do this or can we do that? And I think, the terms of reference that have been given to the Assembly are exceptionally open, and it's therefore within your role, and the Chair, I think, has emphasised this several times, even this morning. It is up to you as the Assembly members for Dublin, representing the people of Dublin, to take a view on the range and extent and scope of an incoming mayoral structure and the supporting regimes behind that. But there are different examples, obviously, which we talked about. And I suppose in a broad sense, coming through from the conversations yesterday, they do boil down into a number of key potential options or variations in options as well. I wouldn't necessarily just restrict myself to what I've set out for my interpretation on the PowerPoint in front of you. So, are you going to go for a model that is about having a democratically elected mayor for the Dublin region, supported by an Assembly, which is kind of partially reflecting what happens in London and in Paris, whilst retaining the existing 4 local authorities and building relationships there? are the 4 existing authorities, do we keep those 4 existing authorities, allow them to have their own democratically elected mayor, but again under the umbrella of a Dublin-wide democratically elected mayor. Again, that in part sort of reflects some of the processes in places like Paris and elsewhere. You could partially look at the model that has applied to Cork in recent years, where Cork City has expanded its area quite substantially, but essentially kept the same management and electoral process in place with the manager and council relationship, albeit given the government decision to replace the Lord Mayor, if you like, with a democratically elected mayor, and have the smaller structures. So in the way that Cork County was reduced as Cork City was increased, might be a potential model. And then the option there, of course, is to have democratically elected mayors in those existing and remaining smaller authorities as well. The other option that's been touched on it would be to actually just abolish the entire system as we now know it, replace a Dublin-wide regional assembly with a democratically elected mayor, but critically, and I do say this critically, underpinned by local metropolitan structures. Auckland went through a model of moving towards a major regional structure, and it didn't work. And it didn't work because there was such a gap between the wider regional role of the mayor and the assembly, the council, the regional council structure. So they ended up having to create boards across the city region to allow for the local democratic voice to come into play. Now, in a way, that might be quite a feasible option to think in terms of, because whether people realise it or not, in fact, the 4 Dublin authorities do operate a lot of their services on an area basis anyway. So, for example, here in Malahide, where we all are this morning, a lot of the day-to-day work of Fingal County Council is undertaken on its behalf by the Malahide Howth Area Committee, which is made up of the elected representatives of that area. So it allows them, come back to what has been said yesterday by the mayors, a very real focus on the immediacy of service delivery, whilst allowing for the wider structure. The one thing I would absolutely caution against is abolishing the lower tier structures, the 4 authorities, and not replacing them with other local structures. It hasn't worked where it has been attempted, where it was being proposed in places like Perth and Melbourne, and indeed in other parts of the Southern Hemisphere. The people withdrew from it when they saw the impact that it was having initially on Auckland and the ineffectiveness of service delivery coming through from the Auckland city authorities. So it seems to me that that's not an option. And there's frankly a reason for us talking about Manchester and not talking about Birmingham, because Birmingham has gone down that model as distinct from the Manchester model. And it has been a very difficult transition, to say the least. But ultimately, those are just options. And I'd also have an eye to what has been done in Limerick by the implementation group, where in a sense, they've created, excuse the term because everybody's using it these days, a hybrid model, which is about having the democratically elected mayor supported by the City and County Council of Limerick, having a range of responsibilities shared between it and the incoming Director General, but also having, for government, a suite of services that potentially could over time migrate into that role over time, so that the emphasis is on getting the people in place, getting the immediate structure up and running, getting the shift in the balance between the relationship of the mayor and the Director General stroke Chief Executive and the centre, operating within an agreed programme for Limerick that is agreed between the mayor's office, the Director General, Chief Exec, and central government. And in doing so, creating a certainty about what the mayor can do, what the resources that might be made available to make those things happen. And alongside that, a longer term view about how more services and more responsibilities might be migrated back into the local authority umbrella under the leadership of the directly elected mayor. So I think that's something that is well worth looking at in the context of the model that ultimately you might put forward as a citizens' assembly for Dublin. Fundamentally, it's your choice, and it's a choice that I am highly envious of, as somebody who's worked on local government reforms across the globe for a long time, to have a body of citizens of all voices representing all the diversity of the great city region of Dublin coming together and focusing in on a pattern of change that is going to take this great area, this great place of the world, and take it forward. I think it's a tremendous opportunity, and I absolutely wish you the very, very best, both as a citizen of Dublin, but also as a person who's been involved in local government reforms across the globe for many, many years. Thank you, Chair.